Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode. And for today's episode, we have with us Sara Clark. Hey, Sara. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Vasco. A pleasure to be here.
So Sara brings us over 15 years of experience facilitating dialogue, training, and healthy culture in highly diverse teams. And we'll find out shortly just how diverse they were. Her passion lies at the intersection of intercultural communication, liberation, and play. Sara draws from Agile and Next economy practices to keep value flowing in her public benefit cooperative, Ember Co-op, and in her company, Curious Ways. And today, Sara is with us to talk about a very interesting concept that I heard her talk about or introduce in the Agile Online Summit. We'll explore that shortly. But first, Sara, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what triggered you to start experimenting with what these days you describe as tension meetings?
Thank you, Vasco. Well, I spent 13, 15 years in higher education, supervising the chief of staff for a team of people coming from all over the world, including US subcultures. And back in 2020, I, like many people, it cracked open my world and I started exploring a whole lot of different areas, kind of getting outside of my niche around intercultural communication and social justice and moving into agile and cooperatives and sociocracy and a lot of other tools. So I found myself in a volunteer collective serving as a facilitator and a steward for the organization. We were fairly new, say 6 months in, and we were having a lot of conflict. And I had been drawing on the tools that I had, but I stumbled across this article from Round Sky Solutions about tension meetings. And I was intrigued, read into the details, and was like, why not? Let's give it a try. We definitely have tensions in our org. And that first experience was essentially a failure. We could not come to the goal of moving the tensions forward, identifying proposals, closing kind of the gaps that we were experiencing. Now, 2 lessons came out of that. One, I should have started doing this much sooner. This would have been great 5 months ago. And then 2, what still came out of that meeting, I think, was extremely useful, identifying that we didn't just have tensions. We had chasms of difference around values, structure, purpose. And what actually happened is that within a few meetings after that, we dissolved the organization.
Wow, that was really a tension meeting.
It was beyond a tension meeting, probably, but yes, we took all this time. It was a very, very engaging meeting. We really collaboratively tried to figure out, okay, what's your point of view? What's my point of view? Can we bridge these? And found that no, actually, we can't. And it liberated us from the kind of sunk cost fallacy of that idea. You just keep going. We've invested so much. We're just going to keep going with this and try to piece it together and make it work. And it bursts the bubble. It's like, oh, actually, maybe we should stop trying to put Band-Aids on this.
Yeah, and I guess that one could say that in a weird way, sometimes that's the best outcome possible, right? Like when we finally realize that, hey, we're trying to fight the windmills here, maybe we would be better applying our energy to some other problems.
Absolutely. That liberated me to be able to start the cooperative that I'm now a part of.
So tell us a little bit more about this tension meeting. So we already know they can be helpful, even in surprising ways, as you just described. when there's tension and conflict. But what are they really? Describe for us what are the key concepts, and why should we learn more about these tension meetings?
Yeah. The term tension in this case is coming from Holacracy, which is an organizational structure for distributed authority. And they describe tensions as a gap, sensing a gap between what is and what should be or what could be. So the what should be might be that there's a challenge, there's a problem. What could be could also be that there's an exciting potential, there's an opportunity. And the word sense is really important there. It's not, oh, I think we have a problem. This is going to be for problems. It's a signal, and it's something that you feel like something feels off here. And then I really appreciate the Round Sky Solutions guide for implementing this in organizations, in meetings, so that you kind of have a framework for what would it look like as a group to collectively compost complaints.
And what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean like address what might be underlying complaints that haven't yet been discussed together?
Mm-hmm. So in our teams, if there's complaints coming up, whether you're feeling them or you're hearing them, there's an indication that something's going on. And all too often, we just kind of ignore them. We can be really good at being like, everything's fine, I'm fine, this is fine. And we lose the opportunity. It's like throwing it in the trash. And so if instead we can bring those out and we can kind of chew on them together, turn them over together, then we can use it as fuel for our teams, for our growth, for our personal and our collective growth.
That's a very interesting perspective. So what do you mean exactly when you say we can use them as fuel?
Yeah. So the idea with the tensions is we don't necessarily resolve them. It's not like, here's a problem, we're going to solve it. It's we've identified there's a gap. So can we close the gap? Or can we move the tension forward? So instead of something being stuck, if your car runs out of fuel, you are stuck. But if we can give the team this opportunity to dig in a little bit and explore it together, might kind of crack open a new potential. Like, oh, we could unstuck ourselves, we could move forward in this way. So in that way, it becomes this fuel for moving in a direction, whether it's I'm going to do something differently in my daily work, or we have a new way of working together that we're going to try out.
This sounds very interesting. So in change management, we often hear about using resistance as a resource, right? Like instead of fighting resistance, you kind of embrace it and you explore it and you kind of move things forward through the energy that comes from the resistance, i.e. you accept it, you tackle it, you acknowledge it, and you work together to find, you co-create, like Jason Little talks in Lean Change Management, you co-create the next step, right? You use that energy that comes from the resistance as kind of the fuel, as you were saying, to move things forward. Is this kind of the same perspective?
I might think of it as a Venn diagram where there's a bunch of overlapping areas that are probably tensions and resistance and applicable to both. Now, a tension could also be, though, we aren't changing. And I'm having this sense that we could change. We could do something more with practicing this value that we have, or we could take this product even further. Nobody's talking about this. We mentioned it in some meeting, but it never came up again. And I'm still feeling the pull toward it.
So what you're saying is that tensions aren't necessarily kind of a negative feeling, but they could be a sense of unrealized hope and expectation.
Absolutely. It can be a whole range. Anything that's not neutral.
That is very interesting. I think we'll come back to that, not neutral. But for our listeners, like if we are right now having this kind of feeling, okay, there's some tension, whatever that might be, either an unrealized hope or expectation or something else. In practice, if we're thinking about a knowledge work team, specifically a software team, let's say, what would a tension meeting look like from the perspective of the facilitator?
Absolutely. So let's imagine we have our software team. They're self-organized. They have some autonomy over their ways of working together, how they get things done, and they have some amount of trust together. And the facilitator has explained the idea tensions, can actually walk through the process of a tension meeting with the proposal of a tension meeting as the thing to move forward. And so you give people a chance to experience it. And then prior to actually holding a tension meeting with the group, they would propose any tensions that they're seeing, identify them, write their name by them, and the team would decide how to prioritize those, whether this might fall in line with how the team makes decisions already. So is it consensus? Are we going to vote? Is the facilitator going to decide? Then the person who named the tension comes to the meeting ready to talk about it. And they've thought about it, what type of tension it is, and if they have any ideas of outcomes of how they could close the gap or move the tension forward. Then the team collectively works together on that tension and see through active engagement, can we come to a place where everybody's on board with moving this tension forward in a specific way? And the tension holder can adapt their proposal or their thoughts as the conversation progresses.
So the idea is to have the whole team participate in it, right?
Absolutely.
And it should be the kind of maybe even priority of the facilitator to bring them along, right? Like anyone can bring up a tension, but the whole team works on the tension as it was described, but also, of course, they bring their own perspectives to it.
Absolutely. And that both sides, the person bringing the tension, there's a hope that they're bringing some curiosity of, I don't have all the information. And so I'm bringing this to the team because I want more information to inform this. And the team's also thinking about that tension holder of how can we help this person? How can we contribute to this person's thinking or experience and move this thing forward?
So I was just thinking as you were describing this, that this can also be a great way for us to emphasize something that is so often in our mind as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, which is to help the team own the process, right? And I guess that tension meeting is also a way to bring ownership to the team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if I were to facilitate the tension meeting, let's say I have a feeling that there's something we need to tackle. Maybe I'm even the one who initiates it. But what are the key aspects of a tension meeting that I should be aware of before I dive into it?
One of the things to have in mind is the team ready and able to engage this process? Is there a mindset of some collective care and collaboration and trust so that we can engage this? And is the facilitator able to hold space and help navigate this process? So there's some skill, I think, involved in both the facilitator and the team. Then there's the team being able to sense those gaps. And this could be modeled and practiced bit by bit. And you might not start with the biggest, most challenging thing, right? Let's start us easing us in. And then analyzing, is this a pattern, something that's coming up regularly? Maybe it has to do with the business or some sort of strategy. Is this a person kind of tension? And is that best just addressed with the person one-on-one? Or is this a team kind of experience and situation we need to talk about? Or is it related to the project that we're working on? So that can provide some framing. Is it a pattern? Is it a person? Or is it a project related tension? And then doing that collective work of composting the complaints or the tensions and ending with identifying if the gap has been closed for the tension holder or if something's been identified to move the tension forward.
And one of the things that you've mentioned several times that I find very curious and also important, right, which is this idea that tension isn't there necessarily to be resolved. It can be there just to help move things forward, right? And I was thinking, okay, but that can be sometimes maybe even unclear, right? Like, okay, but what is, for example, I'm thinking, if there are two possible solutions and the team is divided, which one to take? How is that moving things forward? Because it seems to me the tension might have just moved into the solution space rather than from the original place where it came from.
Yeah. So part of the idea is that the person who sensed the tension is, we're calling them the tension holder, is it's really up to them to identify, did we address their tension? It was their topic that they brought forward. Now, if we're at a point where there's a division between the team, between two proposals, then, and say the tension holder wants one, but the other half of the team wants the other, well, then it's up to your facilitator and how you make your group decisions to figure out, okay, are we going to sit on this a week and let people think about it and bring it back next week, see if we can have a refined version? Who's the decision maker in this case? And that's going to be a team to team situation. One thing to keep in mind is that it could also just be having shared the information is sometimes enough to resolve. It's like, I can exhale now. You all know that I'm having a personal crisis at home. I just needed you to know that if I'm acting a little off, like, just know that that's what's going on.
Or I'm having a conflict with Team X and I would rather not be the one talking to them right now.
Sure, absolutely.
Those are actually very important aspects because sometimes, as you said, sometimes moving things forward might be just recognizing where our limitations are and accepting them, right? Like we keep on functioning, we keep on doing what we need to do. We just find other ways to do that instead of how they were being done before. What are some of the examples of such tension meetings that you've hosted and some of the key insights you've gotten from those?
For my cooperative, Ember Co-op, tension meetings came up in one of our retrospectives as like, hey, could we try this out? And the way that we've integrated it is our team has a weekly meeting and we've added tensions as a standing agenda item. So it's just there creating that space. For me, as someone who was kind of raised to avoid conflict, having that carved out space is really helpful. It doesn't make it as hard to bring up that there's a thing, and we're not calling it a conflict. This is like pre-conflict. This is a tension, a thing I'm sensing. So it's an easier entry point. For the tension that came up this past week, it was about an area of responsibility that anyone on our team could do that was outside of the product that we were developing, and nobody had done it for a while. And so we were able to bring up, hey, there's this lingering thing that I think none of us feel responsibility for. How are we going to address this? How could we make sure this is really important to me? I see this particular value. How can we make sure that we address this in the next quarter?
So it also sounds to me that tension meetings might be a great vehicle for us to discuss prospective tensions, right? Tensions about the future, not necessarily about stuff that has happened, but hey, I'm worried that we're not getting sufficient involvement from Team X, and I know that we're, coming up to a deadline and we will have some dependencies to them. How do we take that forward, right? It could be also about that, about the future.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we, of course, talk about is, okay, so I got a new idea, these tension meetings, and how do we take it to the team? Because maybe, tension meetings, what does that mean? I've never heard of it. What are you talking about, right? Like, look, our intrepid Scrum Master out there, probably sensing that there are some unresolved tensions or possible future tensions in the team. They might want to bring up the idea, hey, why don't we have a tension meeting? I heard this podcast episode and might be something good for us. How do you think we can bring that idea, just that idea, so that there's enough, emotional space for us to even start preparing that for the team?
I think ways without even naming, hey, I got this idea for tension meetings. I think we can start kind of implementing it and trying it out in different ways. So one is a skill set around naming and having shared language around this. So I like this term naming. And it's a thing that could just be modeled in any context, any meeting of like, folks, I'm sensing something. I just want to name that. I think in the next quarter X, or I want to name that I'm seeing this difference of opinion and we haven't resolved it. Another way of just bringing this in could be in with group norms in a way that kind of warms people up for it. So I really like the term lean into awkward, or the phrase lean into awkward. I got this from a colleague, Suzanne Reed, and even our staff who were absolutely unable to bring up conflicts directly, that it's just not part of their norms to be able to say, hey, I have a problem. They could grasp onto this, like lean into awkward. Okay, I'm going to lean into an awkward topic here and bring a thing forward and offer it. So that's another way that can be worked into any meeting. Retrospectives and sprint planning give great grounds for inserting the concept of tension meetings in small ways. So say in a retro, we're already going to be talking about what do we want to hold on to or change moving forward. Well, let's pause and zoom out. Maybe use the playful spidey sense. Does anybody have a spidey sense?
I like sense
that
I feel a disturbance in the force.
Exactly. Is there anything outside of this project? We've just spent all this time in this retro talking about this product or the last sprint. Let's zoom out. Is there anything that we're sensing that could be or should be different? In sprint planning, it could look like zooming in. We've just done all this planning work. We're feeling pretty ready to go. We still have some time left in the meeting if that ever happens to you. And we're going to actually pause for a minute, zoom in, thinking about yourself, imagining yourself in the sprint. Are you seeing anything that could be or should be different than what we've talked about today?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I like the idea. Okay, so lean into awkward is a great phrase. We'll put the link to Suzanne's LinkedIn if you send that to me, so that people know who came up with the phrase. It's a great phrase because it also talks about, okay, I'm probably gonna feel embarrassed about talking about it, but I'll lean into it because I feel there's something there, right? And the lean into is a great concept also, because you're not necessarily, hey, there's something wrong, let's fix it. You're saying, I'm ambivalent about this. I don't know. Is this like, am I the only one seeing this, right? Like it's more of this openness, right? More of this trusting way to describe what might be going on in the team at that particular time.
One group that I was a guest facilitator for, I wasn't going to propose, well, let's do tension meetings. So I used this phrase, and they wisely added the caveat of and get consent, get agreement from the group. So propose the thing, I'd like to lean into this, and maybe we do a quick round of thumbs, like, are people in for engaging this right now? Would people rather do it later? And get some sort of agreement before we just jump into this potential, what might be just a little awkward or could be really awkward for someone, and they need to be prepared for that conversation.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So we've introduced tension meetings. We've shared some tips on how to potentially prepare, host, facilitate that kind of discussions. But I'm sure that we got some people interested and curious. So for those who would like to learn more about tension meetings, where could they go?
I highly recommend what's been written by Holacracy on tensions, reading that, as well as the post by Rebecca Fisher-McGinty on Round Sky Solutions Cooperatives page.
Absolutely, and we'll put the link to those on the show notes. Make sure that everybody can easily find it. And how about you, Sara? Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
People can find me at curiousways.co or on LinkedIn, as well as doing public offerings in collaboration with Anjali Leon of PPL Coach.
And we'll put the link to those so that people can easily get in touch. Why not send a few questions Sara's way? Maybe you are curious about it and want some support. Get in touch and ask for her input. Sara, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for sharing all of that wisdom and for your generosity with your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Bosco.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.